In the early hours of the morning, a police officer was patrolling abandoned railway tracks with his unmatched scent dog. Suddenly the animal froze, tense, signaling invisible danger as something strange appeared on the tracks. The officer rushed and saved a tied man moments before a train passed. Every clue, every trace and every strange look revealed a conspiracy far greater than it seemed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching us from. We continue. The sun had not yet fully risen when Sergeant Caleb Miles began his routine patrol along the banks of the old Pittsburgh Railway. It was a morning like any other, or so he thought as he adjusted his vest and watched Thor, his faithful four-legged companion, sniff the air with that characteristic intensity. Thor wasn't just a trained police dog. He was his partner, his silent confidant, the one who had been with him since the darkest days of his life, when Caleb almost gave up on everything after the tumultuous divorce from Helen. Helen, the name still echoed in his mind like a stubborn ghost that refused to leave. 5 years of marriage, 3 of separation, and yet Caleb's heart still beat differently when he thought of her. It wasn't love, not anymore. It was something between resentment and longing, a confusing mix of feelings he preferred to keep locked deep in his soul. But on that morning, as he walked along the abandoned tracks that cut through industrial areas and stretches of dense woods, Caleb had no idea that fate was about to shuffle all the cards of his life once again. Thor stopped abruptly. His ears perked, up, pointed forward, and the animal's entire body tensed like a rope about to snap. Caleb knew that behavior. It meant danger, or something very out of the ordinary. The sergeant felt a shiver run down his spine and followed the dog cautiously, allowing Thor to lead him through the tall grass, dodging fallen logs and sections of track corroded by time and neglect. What they found there would change everything. Lying on the rotting wooden ties was a man. Tied up, unconscious, his body partially slumped over the rails. Caleb felt the blood run cold in his veins. In the distance, a train whistle echoed, growing louder and more menacing. There was no time to think, only to act. Thor lunged forward with force, as if understanding the urgency of the moment, and Caleb ran, pulling the knife from his belt and cutting the ropes with precise, desperate movements. He dragged the man off the tracks in the final seconds, feeling the hot wind from the train pass so close it nearly tore off his cap. When he could finally breathe, Caleb looked at the face of the man he had just saved. And that's when everything became even more surreal. This was no ordinary man. It was Owen Brandon, one of the wealthiest and most influential businessmen in the United States, owner of one of the largest tech companies in the country, always on the covers of magazines, surrounded by controversies, corporate disputes, and more recently, confidential investigations into suspicious business dealings. What the hell was a billionaire like Owen Brandon doing, tied to abandoned train tracks? The question hammered in Caleb's head as he checked the man's vital signs. Owen was alive, but dazed, muttering disconnected words that made no sense at all. Caleb called for backup, on his radio, and while he waited, Thor continued to sniff the surrounding area, restless, as if sensing that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Near the spot where they found Owen, Thor picked up the scent of an electronic briefcase. Caleb approached to examine it, but when he turned his back for just a moment to check the businessman's pulse again, the briefcase simply vanished, as if it had never been there. Caleb felt a chill. Someone was watching. Someone was nearby, controlling every movement, every detail of that macabre scene. When the rescue team finally arrived, they took Owen to the hospital under police escort. Caleb remained at the scene with Thor, examining every inch of that cursed place. And that's when he found something in the pocket of Owen's suit jacket, something the medical team hadn't noticed in their haste. A flash drive. Small, discreet, but it felt as heavy as lead in the sergeant's hands. Caleb knew he shouldn't do it, but curiosity got the better of him. He connected the flash drive to his phone, and what he saw left him speechless. Maps. Dozens of maps of old railway tunnels, some dating back decades, all indicating underground routes, secret passages, hidden compartments. This wasn't just a failed kidnapping. It was part of something infinitely more complex. Caleb returned to the precinct with his head buzzing with unanswered questions. He needed to talk to Owen, to understand what was happening, but the businessman was sedated and under intensive care. Meanwhile, the sergeant began to investigate on his own, digging up information about Owen Brandon online, talking to colleagues, trying to piece together the impossible puzzle. That's when Helen appeared, not in person, but through a text message on Caleb's phone. A short, direct message that made his heart race. "We need to talk about Owen Brandon, it's urgent." Helen worked as a corporate lawyer, and Caleb knew she dealt with large companies, but he never imagined his ex-wife could be connected in any way to this case. He hesitated before replying, but the need to understand what was happening was stronger. They arranged to meet the next day at a discreet coffee shop in downtown Pittsburgh. Caleb barely slept that night. Thor sensed his owner's restlessness and stayed by the bed the whole time like a silent guardian. Caleb's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Owen Brandon, the maps, the missing briefcase, and now Helen. Everything seemed connected in a way he couldn't yet comprehend, but that left him deeply disturbed. The next morning, Caleb arrived at the coffee shop before the agreed time. He ordered a black coffee and watched the street through the window, trying to calm his nerves. When Helen walked in, Caleb's stomach churned. She looked different, more mature, more elegant, but still with that piercing gaze that always disarmed him. Helen sat across from him without any preamble and got straight to the point. "Owen Brandon has been my client for 2 years. I'm defending his company in a series of sensitive lawsuits involving technology transfers and international contracts. But there's something you need to know, Caleb. Owen is being blackmailed, and I'm almost certain that what happened yesterday wasn't a common kidnapping. It was a message, a warning." Caleb felt his throat go dry. From whom? Who's behind this? Helen looked away, and for the first time, Caleb saw fear in her eyes. "I don't know for sure, but I know it involves very powerful people, politicians, businessmen, maybe even authorities. Owen was investigating something within his own company, something he discovered by accident that could destroy careers, fortunes, and reputations. He came to me weeks ago, terrified, saying his life was in danger. I thought he was exaggerating, being paranoid as usual. But after what happened yesterday, Caleb, I know he was right." Caleb absorbed every word in silence. "So, you think someone inside Owen's company is involved in this?" Helen nodded slowly. "Not just inside the company. Owen told me he discovered that old railway tunnels were being used to transport something illegally. He didn't give me details, but he said it involved sensitive technology, equipment that shouldn't leave the country, confidential information. When he started investigating on his own, the threats began. First, they were discreet, then they became more direct. And now this." Caleb ran a hand over his face, trying to process it all. "And why didn't you go to the police sooner? Why didn't you come to me?" Helen sighed deeply. "Because Owen made me swear to secrecy. He said he couldn't trust anyone in the police, that there were insiders, that any wrong move could cost him his life. I respected my client's wishes, Caleb, but things have changed now. Now he almost lost his life, and I need your help." Caleb looked into Helen's eyes and saw sincerity, but also desperation. He knew he was entering dangerous territory, but he couldn't just turn his back. Not after saving Owen's life, not after seeing those maps on the flash drive, and definitely not after knowing that Helen was involved somehow in this whole plot. "All right, I'll help. But on one condition, you tell me everything you know. No omissions, no secrets." Helen agreed, and for the next hour she revealed everything Owen had shared with her. She spoke of secret meetings he had witnessed, of executives in his own company acting strangely, of documents that mysteriously disappeared, of intercepted phone calls. Every detail painted an increasingly dark picture of a conspiracy that extended far beyond what Caleb could have imagined. When they left the coffee shop, Caleb felt he had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just a police officer doing his duty. Now he was personally involved in something that could put his own life at risk. And worse, he was connected to Helen again, in a way he had sworn never to allow. In the following days, Caleb dove deep into the investigation. He visited the hospital several times to try to speak with Owen, but the businessman remained sedated, under intensive care, and watched by private security guards who allowed no one near except immediate family. Caleb managed to get official authorization to investigate the case, but felt resistance within his own department. His immediate superior, Captain Roger Travers, seemed strangely uninterested in the case, always trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation, suggesting that perhaps Owen had put himself in that position, maybe involved in debts or personal problems. But Caleb wasn't an idiot. He knew the signs of someone trying to bury an investigation, and the more Captain Travers tried to discourage him, the more determined Caleb became. Thor remained his greatest ally. The dog had an unparalleled sense of smell, and Caleb trusted the animal's instincts more than any human's. Together they returned several times to the place where they found Owen, exploring every inch of the abandoned tracks, following the clues Thor identified. And that's how they discovered the first secret tunnel. It was hidden under a pile of rubble and dense vegetation, just a few feet from the tracks. A narrow entrance led to a large underground compartment, clearly used recently. There were tire marks on the dirt floor, remnants of packaging, and most disturbingly, sophisticated electronic equipment abandoned in a hurry. Caleb photographed everything, collected evidence, but knew he had to be careful. If there really were corrupt cops involved, handing this evidence to the wrong people could be fatal. That's when Caleb made a risky decision. He contacted a trusted investigative journalist, someone he had worked with years ago on another sensitive case. Mark Fisher was known for not being afraid to confront the powerful, for exposing corruption even when threatened. Caleb showed Mark everything he had discovered, and the journalist was impressed. He agreed to investigate on his own, using his contacts and resources, while Caleb continued to work on the official side. Meanwhile, the relationship between Caleb and Helen deepened again, but in a complicated and tense way. They met regularly to exchange information, but each meeting brought up painful memories of the past, wounds that had never fully healed. Helen was different, more vulnerable than Caleb remembered. One night, after a particularly difficult meeting, she finally opened up. "I never truly apologized to you, Caleb, for what I did, for how we ended." Caleb remained silent, not knowing how to respond. The divorce had been traumatic. Helen had cheated on him with a co-worker, and when Caleb found out, his world fell apart. He threw himself into work, into drinking, almost lost everything. It was Thor who saved him, who brought him back to life, giving him a renewed purpose. "We don't need to talk about this now, Helen." But she insisted. "I need to, Caleb, because looking at you now, seeing the man you've become, I realize how foolish I was, how much I threw away. And I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need you to know that I regret it every single day." Caleb felt his chest tighten. Part of him wanted to hug her, to forgive her, to start over. But another part, the hurt and bitter part, still couldn't forget the pain. "Helen, what happened between us is in the past. Now we need to focus on solving this, on protecting Owen and finding out who's behind this whole conspiracy." Helen nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear that escaped. "You're right, I'm sorry for bringing it up." But Caleb knew that as much as he tried to deny it, the feelings were coming back, and that scared him deeply. A week after the rescue, Owen finally woke up. Caleb got the news and rushed to the hospital, accompanied by Helen. When they entered the room, they found the businessman frail, pale, but conscious. Owen's eyes lit up when he saw Helen, but showed suspicion when they landed on Caleb. "Who is he?" "This is Sergeant Caleb Miles, Owen. He's the one who saved your life. You can trust him." Owen studied Caleb for long, seconds before nodding slightly. "Then I owe you my life, Sergeant." Caleb approached the bed. "Mr. Brandon, I need you to tell me everything you remember. Who did this to you? Why?" Owen closed his eyes, and Caleb could see he was struggling to organize his memories. "I was in my office working late. Someone came in. I didn't see their face. They were masked. They gave me an injection, something that made me dizzy, weak. When I woke up, I was tied to those tracks. I heard voices, but I couldn't understand what they were saying, and then nothing. I just woke up here. Caleb exchanged a worried look with Helen. Do you have any idea who might want to do this? Any enemies? Someone you've wronged in business? Owen gave a bitter laugh. Sergeant, when you're one of the richest men in the country, the list of enemies is long. But this wasn't about money or personal revenge. It was about what I discovered. And what exactly did you discover? Owen hesitated, looking at Helen as if asking for permission. She nodded encouragingly. I discovered that my own company is being used as a front to transport forbidden technology out of the country. Surveillance equipment, artificial intelligence systems, things that shouldn't even exist yet, much less be illegally exported. And when I started to investigate, I realized it wasn't just dishonest employees. It was people at the top, people I trusted. Caleb felt a knot in his stomach. And the railway tunnels? How do they fit into this? Owen sighed heavily. The tunnels are used for transport. Shipments leave my company in the middle of the night, are taken to the underground tunnels, and from there they go to clandestine ports, all without passing through any official inspection. Point? It's brilliant in a perverse way, and I, like an idiot, didn't notice a thing for years. Who else knows about this? No one. Just me. And now you two. That's why they tried to eliminate me, because I'm the only real threat to their operation. Caleb stepped back from the bed, processing everything. Mr. Brandon, you need protection. Real protection. I can't guarantee that there aren't people involved in this within the police force. Owen agreed. I've already hired a private team, but I need more, Sergeant. I need you to keep investigating to find out who's behind all this and expose them. Because if we do nothing, they'll try again. And next time, there might not be anyone to save me. Caleb promised he would do everything in his power and left the hospital with Helen by his side. In the parking lot, she held his arm. Caleb, do you realize the danger we're in? If these people were capable of trying to murder a billionaire in broad daylight, imagine what they could do to us. I know, Helen, but I can't just walk away from this, not after everything we've discovered. Helen looked at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. It's always been like this with you, hasn't it? Always putting duty above everything else, even above your own life. Caleb smiled sadly. It's the only way I know how to live. They said goodbye, and Caleb went home to Thor. That night, sitting on the couch with the dog at his feet, Caleb mentally reviewed everything that had happened since that morning he found Owen on the tracks. Every clue, every revelation, every connection. And the more he thought, the more he realized he was just scratching the surface of something much bigger, much more dangerous. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Mark, the journalist. Caleb, I've got something. I need you to come to my house now. It's urgent. Caleb didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys, called Thor, and drove to Mark's house on the other side of the city. When he arrived, he found the journalist visibly nervous, looking out the window as if expecting to be watched at any moment. What happened, Mark? Mark led him to his office and turned on the computer. I got access to some internal documents from Owen's company. Don't ask me how, but I did. And Caleb, what I found is explosive. There are names of senators, congressmen, judges, businessmen from other sectors, all involved in this illegal export ring. And there's more. There are payment records, million-dollar transfers, all documented. Whoever organized this was careless enough to leave a digital trail. Caleb looked at the computer screen, seeing endless spreadsheets with names, amounts, dates. It was enough material to bring down dozens of powerful people. Mark, this is too dangerous. If we leak this now without proper protection, we'll be signing our own death warrants. I know. That's why I need your help. We need a plan. We need to know how and when to release this without putting ourselves directly in the line of fire. Caleb agreed, and they spent hours devising a strategy. They decided to send copies of the documents to multiple media outlets simultaneously, as well as to international investigative journalism organizations. That way, even if they tried to silence one, others would publish the information. It was risky, but it was the only chance they had. When Caleb finally got home, it was past 3 in the morning. He was exhausted, mentally and physically, but he knew he couldn't stop now. not when he was so close to uncovering the whole truth. Thor growled softly, and Caleb realized something was wrong. The door to his house was ajar. He always locked it. Always. With his heart pounding, he drew his gun and entered cautiously, with Thor ahead on high alert. The living room was dark, but Caleb noticed a figure sitting on the couch. When he flipped on the light, he almost dropped his gun. It was Helen. But she wasn't alone. Next to her was a man Caleb recognized immediately. It was Brian Castillo, Helen's ex-lover, the man who had destroyed his marriage. What the hell is going on here? Helen stood up quickly, her eyes red from crying. Caleb, I can explain. Brian showed up at my house tonight. He's involved in all of this. He works for Owen's company. Caleb felt the floor disappear from under his feet. Brian stood up too, his hands raised in a sign of peace. Sergeant Miles, I know you have every reason to hate me, but I need your help. My life is in danger. I was involved in the operation, but I want out. I want to be a whistleblower, and they know it. Caleb pointed the gun at Brian, his hands shaking with rage. Why should I believe you? Why shouldn't I just arrest you right now? Because I have proof that goes beyond what you or that journalist have found. I have recordings, videos, original documents. I was the one responsible for organizing the transports in the tunnels. I know everything, and I'm willing to hand it all over, as long as you guarantee my protection. Caleb looked at Helen, searching for a sign, some guidance. She just nodded, slightly, as if to say he should listen. Caleb lowered the gun slowly, but kept his guard up. All right, Brian, I'll hear what you have to say, but know this. If you're lying, if this is a trap, I swear you'll regret it. Brian nodded, relieved. It's not a trap, Sergeant. I just want to get out of this alive. And so, in that surreal dawn, with his ex-wife and the man who had stolen her from him sitting in his living room, Caleb Miles realized his life had become a plot worthy of the most absurd stories. But there was no time to process the conflicting emotions that consumed him. There was a mystery to be solved, lives to be protected, and a conspiracy to be exposed. And Caleb knew, with absolute certainty, that the next few days would define not only Owen Brandon's fate, but also his own. The dawn dragged on, heavy and tense inside Caleb's house. Thor remained alert, watching Brian's every move with suspicion, while Helen tried to mediate the impossible situation that had formed. Caleb still held his gun firmly, even though he had lowered it. Part of him wanted to throw Brian out, immediately arrest him, or simply never look at the face of the man who had destroyed his marriage again. But the other part, the rational part, that made him a good police officer, knew he had to listen. He had to understand. Then talk, but choose your words carefully because my patience is at its limit. Brian took a deep breath, running his hands nervously through his hair. I've been working at Owen's company for 6 years. I started as a logistics manager, handling normal transports, conventional deliveries. But 3 years ago I was promoted to a special division. They told me it was for confidential operations, secret contracts with important international clients. At first I thought it was just corporate bureaucracy, you know, the kind of stuff big companies do that nobody questions. But slowly I started to realize something was wrong. Wrong how? Be specific. Brian got up and started pacing the room, clearly nervous. The shipments I coordinated never went through normal inspections. Everything was done at night, without official documentation, without records in the company's common systems. I asked my superior once, Director Frederick Larson, and he told me not to worry, that it was all legal, just business strategies to avoid competition. I believed him, or rather I wanted to believe him, because the salary was very good, the bonuses were huge, and I was making more in a month than I used to make in a year. So you knew you were involved in something illegal and chose to ignore it for money. Is that it? Brian stopped pacing and looked directly at Caleb. Yes, and I have no excuse for it. I was greedy, I was a coward. But things changed when I found out what we were really transporting. It wasn't just common tech equipment. It was state-of-the-art surveillance systems, artificial intelligence capable of tracking millions of people simultaneously, facial recognition technology that shouldn't even exist yet. And it was all going to countries that would use it for terrible things. To control populations, to persecute dissidents, to violate privacy on unimaginable levels. Caleb felt a growing weight in his chest. "How did you find this out?" Brian sighed. "By accident. One of the shipments had a problem. A container opened during transport in the underground tunnels. I was personally supervising that night and saw the contents. I was shocked. I started investigating on my own, accessing systems I shouldn't have, reading confidential documents, and I discovered that the operation involved not just Owen's company, but an entire network. Politicians receiving bribes to turn a blind eye, port authorities being paid off, even police officers facilitating transport without inspection. And Owen? Did he know about all this? Brian shook his head. No, at least not at first. Owen is many things, but he's not corrupt like that. He was deceived by people he trusted within his own company. Director Frederick Larson is the one who really runs everything, along with other executives. They use the company's structure, Owen's name, his reputation to build this operation. When Owen started getting suspicious and investigating, they tried to silence him, hence what happened on the tracks. Helen, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Brian came to me 2 weeks ago. He was terrified, saying his life was in danger. He said he wanted out of the operation, but that they wouldn't let him. That anyone who tried to leave ended up disappearing. I didn't know what to do, Caleb. He begged me to help him, and as a lawyer I knew that if he really had proof, we could use it to protect him and expose the entire network." Caleb looked at Helen with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "And you didn't think it was important to tell me this before? You didn't think I should know that the man who almost destroyed my life was involved in a criminal conspiracy?" Helen looked down, visibly ashamed. "I wanted to tell you, Caleb, but I was scared. Scared of how you would react. Scared of putting you in danger. Scared of everything. I know I was a coward." Caleb took a deep breath, trying to control the rage boiling inside him. This was no time for personal reckonings. There were bigger things at stake. "All right, let's focus on what matters now. Brian, you said you have proof. Where is it?" Brian pulled a small storage device from his pocket. "It's all here. Recordings of secret meetings, videos of the transports being made in the tunnels, documents with the signatures of those involved, bank records of illegal transfers, everything. But there's one condition. I need protection, real protection, because the moment this proof goes public, they'll know it was me who handed it over." Caleb took the device and examined it. "I'll need to verify all of this, and if it's true, we'll come up with a plan. But I'm not promising anything until I'm sure you're not trying to trick me." Brian agreed, and Caleb instructed him to stay at the house under watch until the next morning. Helen offered to stay too, but Caleb refused. He preferred not to have her around at that moment. There were too many emotions, too many memories, and he needed to keep a cool head. When morning came, Caleb connected Brian's device to his computer and began to analyze the files. What he saw left him speechless. There were hours of audio recordings, videos clearly showing clandestine transports happening in the old railway tunnels, detailed spreadsheets with names, amounts, dates. It was explosive material, enough to dismantle the entire operation and put dozens of powerful people behind bars, but Caleb knew he had to be cautious. If he shared this with the wrong people in the police department, the material could simply disappear, and him along with it. He decided to contact Mark again and also seek out someone trustworthy at the U.S. Attorney's Office, someone with the structure and authority to handle a case of this magnitude. Meanwhile, he needed to protect Brian. As much as he hated to admit it, the man was a key witness, and keeping him alive was crucial. Caleb kept him hidden in a safe place, a small country house belonging to a retired police friend, someone he trusted completely. Over the next few days, Caleb worked tirelessly. He met with Mark, with federal prosecutors, sharing the evidence strategically and in a controlled manner. With each meeting, the web of conspiracy revealed itself to be even more complex. It wasn't just crimes of illegal export. There was money laundering, corruption of public officials, forgery of official documents, and even indications that some of the exported technologies were being used in international conflicts, causing suffering to entire populations. The pressure mounted. Caleb began to notice he was being followed. Strange cars appeared on his street. Anonymous, threatening phone calls started coming in. Thor, his faithful companion, became increasingly agitated, as if sensing the growing danger. Caleb knew he had to be careful, but he couldn't back down now. Helen remained involved, working to legally protect Owen while the businessman recovered in the hospital. She and Caleb met regularly to exchange information, and with each meeting the tension between them became more palpable. There was something unresolved, something that hung in the air like a heavy cloud. One night, after a particularly intense meeting with the federal prosecutors, Helen invited Caleb to dinner at her house. He hesitated but eventually accepted. He needed to relax, even if just for a few hours, and part of him still cared about Helen, as much as he tried to deny it. Helen's house was elegant, tastefully decorated, reflecting the professional success she had achieved in recent years. She prepared a simple but delicious meal, and during dinner they talked about trivial things, avoiding the heavy topics that haunted them. It was only when they finished eating and sat on the porch with a glass of wine that Helen finally touched on the subject they had both been avoiding. "Caleb, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Have you forgiven me for what I did to you, to our marriage?" Caleb remained silent for long seconds, looking at the starry sky. "I don't know, Helen. Some days I think I have, that I'm over it. And you're just a part of my past. But then there are days when the anger comes back, and I remember how I felt when I found out about you and Brian, like my world had crumbled, like I wasn't enough." Helen felt tears stream down her face. "You were always enough, Caleb. Always. The problem was never you. It was me. I was lost, insecure, searching for something I didn't even know what it was. And by the time I realized the mistake I had made, it was too late. You were already gone. You had built walls so high around yourself that I couldn't climb them. And now? What do you want from me now, Helen?" She looked directly into his eyes. "I want a second chance. I know I don't deserve it. I know it's asking too much. But these past few days, working with you, seeing the incredible man you've become, I realized I never stopped loving you. And I know it might be too late, but I had to tell you." Caleb felt his heart race. Part of him wanted to hug her, kiss her, start all over. But the hurt part, the part that still held a grudge, held him back. "Helen, I can't just forget everything and start over as if nothing happened. You cheated on me with Brian, and now he's back in my life, involved in this whole mess. It's too complicated." I know it's complicated. But I'm willing to wait as long as it takes, because for the first time in years, Caleb, I have hope that maybe we can still have a future together." Caleb didn't answer. He just took Helen's hand and squeezed it gently, a small but significant gesture. They stayed like that for a long time in silence, just holding hands under the starry sky, as the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hung between them. In the following days, the operation to expose the conspiracy took shape. The federal prosecutors, armed with the evidence provided by Brian and the evidence collected by Caleb and Mark, began preparing a task force to execute simultaneous search and seizure warrants at dozens of locations related to the criminal network. It would be the largest operation against corporate and technological corruption in recent U.S. history. But before they could act, something terrible happened. Brian disappeared. Caleb had gone to visit him at the country house for another interrogation, and when he arrived, he found the place ransacked, signs of a struggle, and no trace of Brian. Thor sniffed the area and identified strange scents, likely from people who had broken in and taken Brian by force. Caleb felt panic take over. Brian was the key witness, and without him, the case would be much weaker. Moreover, the disappearance indicated that the criminal network knew exactly what was happening, that they had informants within the very operation being assembled. Paranoia set in. Caleb no longer knew who to trust. He rushed to the hospital where Owen was still recovering, fearing the businessman might be the next target. When he arrived, he found the room empty. Owen had been discharged that morning and had left with his private security team. Caleb tried to contact Helen to find out the businessman's whereabouts, But she didn't answer her phone. The feeling that everything was falling apart grew with each passing second. That's when Caleb received an anonymous message on his phone, an address and a short sentence. If you want to find Brian and know the truth, come alone, bring the dog. Caleb knew it was an obvious trap, but he had no choice. He couldn't just abandon Brian despite their history, and more importantly, he needed to understand who was behind all this, who was orchestrating this macabre dance. He checked the address. It was in an abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, near the old railway tracks, the same place where it had all begun. Caleb prepared carefully, taking his gun, a bulletproof vest, and of course Thor. The dog was his greatest asset, capable of detecting dangers he would never notice. When he arrived at the location, night had completely fallen. The industrial warehouse was plunged into shadows, lit only by the faint light of the moon. Caleb advanced cautiously, with Thor in front, all senses on high alert. In the center of the warehouse, tied to a chair, was Brian, alive, but visibly beaten and terrified. Caleb was about to run to him when Thor let out a low growl, a warning. Caleb stopped immediately and looked around. That's when he realized they weren't alone. Shadows moved at the edges of the warehouse, hooded figures slowly surrounding him. A voice echoed in the empty space. "Sergeant Caleb Miles, we finally meet in person." Caleb recognized the voice but couldn't immediately place it. "Who are you? What do you want?" A figure emerged from the shadows, slowly removing his hood. Caleb felt the floor disappear from under his feet. It was Captain Roger Travers, his direct superior in the police force, the man who had tried to bury the investigation from the start. Roger smiled coldly. "Surprised, Sergeant? You shouldn't be. You were always too smart for your own good. You should have stopped when I suggested it. You should have forgotten about Owen's case and gone back to your routine patrols. But no, you had to be the hero. You had to investigate, to uncover, to stick your nose where it wasn't wanted." Caleb kept his hand near his gun, but knew he was outnumbered. "You've been involved in this from the beginning. You're part of the network." Roger let out a dry laugh. "Part?" "Dear Sergeant, I'm much more than a part. I'm one of the coordinators. For years, I've been facilitating police operations to protect the transports, ensuring certain cases are never investigated too deeply, eliminating problems before they become too big. And everything was perfect until you showed up with that damn dog and saved Owen. And now? Are you going to eliminate me too? Do you think that will solve anything?" Roger shrugged. "Actually, I don't need to eliminate you personally. I just need to make sure you understand the consequences of continuing this foolish investigation. You will stop. You will destroy all the evidence you've collected. You will convince the journalist and the prosecutors to drop the case. And in return, I'll let you and the people you love live. And if I refuse..." Roger made a signal, and one of the hooded figures brought a tablet showing surveillance footage. Caleb's blood ran cold. There were images of Helen in her house, of Mark in his office, of Owen in the hospital, all being watched, monitored. "See how simple it is, Sergeant. With a single command from me, they can all disappear. The choice is yours. Their lives in exchange for your silence." Caleb looked at Brian, still tied up and terrified. He looked at Thor, who remained tense and ready to attack at the slightest signal. He looked at Roger, the man he had trusted for years, now revealed as an unscrupulous criminal. And then he made a decision. He unleashed Thor. The dog shot forward like a bolt of lightning, tackling Roger before he could react. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Caleb drew his gun and fired into the air, causing the other figures to retreat momentarily. He ran to Brian, cut his ropes with his knife, and pulled him behind a stack of old crates for cover. Thor continued his assault, preventing the henchmen from getting close. The dog was trained for combat situations, and even against multiple opponents, he remained fierce and efficient. Caleb used the confusion to quickly call his contact at the U.S. Attorney's office, shouting the address and calling for urgent backup. Roger, recovering from Thor's attack, yelled furious orders to his men. "Get him! Don't let him escape!" But Caleb was already on the move, dragging Brian towards a side exit he had spotted. Thor followed them, keeping the pursuers at a distance with calculated and intimidating lunges. They ran through the abandoned industrial area, jumping over obstacles, dodging shots that began to echo in the night. Finally, they reached Caleb's car. He threw Brian into the back seat, called Thor, and sped away violently. In the rearview mirror, he could see the figures emerging from the warehouse, but it was too late. They were far enough away. Brian was breathing heavily, still in shock. "They were going to kill me, Caleb. They were going to kill me if you hadn't shown up." Caleb kept his eyes fixed on the road. "I know, but you're safe now, and Captain Travers made a big mistake. He exposed himself, and that changes everything." Caleb drove straight to the U.S. Attorney's office, where he was met by the prosecutors, who were already aware of the situation from his desperate call. Brian was placed under official protection, and Caleb could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over, at least for now. But as he gave his formal statement, Caleb couldn't get Roger's words out of his head. The images of Helen, Mark, and Owen being monitored. The threat still hung in the air, and he knew the battle was far from over. Roger may have been exposed, but the network was much larger. There were other people involved, other layers of corruption to be revealed. And deep down, Caleb knew the worst was yet to come. The following days were a whirlwind of frantic activity. The exposure of Captain Roger Travers as a key player in the conspiracy shook the entire Pittsburgh Police Department. Internal investigations were opened, dozens of officers were preventively suspended, and the media began to cover the case with growing intensity. Mark published the first article revealing the outlines of the criminal operation, and the impact was immediate. Society was shocked, outraged, demanding justice. But for Caleb, none of this brought relief. He knew they had only scratched the surface. Roger had been arrested, but during interrogations he remained completely silent, protected by a team of expensive lawyers who had appeared out of nowhere. Someone with a lot of power was protecting the corrupt captain, and that meant the network extended far beyond what they had imagined. Brian remained under protection in a secret location, providing detailed information to investigators. His revelations were shocking. He described a scheme that had been operating for at least a decade, involving not only Owen's company, but other major American corporations. Military technology, surveillance systems, encrypted communication equipment, all being illegally exported to countries that would use these tools for questionable purposes. Owen, finally recovered and safe, gave a press conference that stopped the nation. With a voice thick with emotion, the businessman revealed that he had been deceived by people he trusted blindly, that his company had been infiltrated and used as an instrument for crimes he could never have imagined. He promised to cooperate fully with the investigations and use all his wealth and influence to repair the damage caused. Helen worked tirelessly alongside Owen, coordinating the businessman's legal defense and ensuring he was protected from attempts to hold him criminally responsible for the actions of his traitorous subordinates. She and Caleb continued to meet regularly, and with each encounter the tension between them slowly transformed into something different. It was no longer just resentment or hurt. There was now a renewed connection, a complicity forged in the heat of the crisis. One night, after a particularly grueling meeting with federal prosecutors, Helen and Caleb went out for coffee. They walked through the streets of Pittsburgh in silence for a while, just enjoying each other's company until Helen finally broke the silence. "Did you know I never stopped thinking about you, Caleb? Even during all those years, even when I was with Brian, there was a part of me that knew I had made the biggest mistake of my life." Caleb stopped walking and looked at her. "Helen, I don't know if I can just forget everything and start over. The pain was too great. The betrayal was too deep. I know, I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just saying that if there's a small chance for us to rebuild something, even if it's just a friendship, I'd like to try. Because these days by your side, seeing how you've become an even more incredible man, have made me realize that I threw away the best thing I ever had." Caleb felt his chest tighten. Part of him wanted to resist, to keep his defenses up. But another part, the part that had never really stopped loving Helen, was tired of fighting. "Maybe we could try, slowly. No rush. See where it takes us." The smile that lit up Helen's face was the most beautiful thing Caleb had seen in years. They continued walking, and this time their hands found each other naturally, intertwining with a familiarity that time had not erased. Meanwhile, in the shadows, powerful forces were moving. Roger's arrest had alerted the true masterminds of the operation that they were being exposed. Secret meetings took place in private rooms of exclusive clubs, in armored skyscraper offices, in secluded mansions. The consensus was clear. They needed to eliminate the problem before more damage was done. And the problem had a name: Sergeant Caleb Miles. Caleb began to notice signs of intensified surveillance. Cars now followed him openly, not bothering to be discreet. It was a clear message: we are watching, we know where you are, and we can get to you at any moment. Thor was constantly agitated, sensing the growing tension. The dog practically never left Caleb's side, as if he knew his human companion was in real danger. It was Mark who brought the news that would change everything. The journalist showed up at Caleb's house one night, visibly nervous, holding a folder full of documents. "Caleb, you need to see this. I got access to bank records through a confidential source, and what I found is absolutely terrifying." Caleb took the folder and began to examine the documents. They were records of financial transfers, millions and millions of dollars changing, hands through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. But what really shocked him were the names of the ultimate beneficiaries: senators, federal congressmen, a cabinet secretary, businessmen from various sectors, and most shocking of all, a name Caleb never expected to see there: Judge Augustus Mendoza, the magistrate responsible for overseeing investigations into corporate corruption in the state. This can't be right. Judge Mendoza is known for being incorruptible, for having convicted dozens of powerful criminals throughout his career. Mark shook his head sadly. "I thought the same thing. So I dug deeper, and I discovered that Judge Mendoza's son, Rafael Mendoza, is involved up to his neck in the operation. He's one of the executives at Owen's company, worked directly with Frederick Larson coordinating the illegal transports. And apparently, the judge knew everything and received a cut of the profits in exchange for ensuring that no serious investigation ever prospered." Caleb felt nauseous. If the judge responsible for the investigations was corrupt, then the entire operation they were building could be compromised. They needed to act fast, before Mendoza could sabotage everything. They immediately took the information to their trusted federal prosecutors. The reaction was one of shock and urgency. Emergency meetings were called, strategies were reformulated, and it was decided that it was time to act. They couldn't wait any longer, couldn't give the criminals time to reorganize. The operation had to happen now. It was scheduled for 3 days later. A massive, nationally coordinated operation with search and seizure warrants to be executed simultaneously at dozens of locations. Companies would be raided, offices would be searched, executives would be arrested, bank accounts would be frozen. It would be the largest operation against corporate corruption in the country's history. But on the eve of the E-Chai operation, something terrible happened. There was an attempt on Owen's life. The businessman was at his mansion, surrounded by security, when armed men invaded the property. There was an intense shootout, security guards were injured, and Owen was taken by force. Helen, who was at the mansion at the time of the attack, managed to hide and call Caleb desperately. "Caleb, they've taken Owen. It was armed men, professionals. Please, you have to do something." Caleb felt his world collapse. Owen was the main witness, the man whose company had been used as a front for the entire operation. Without him, the case would be much weaker. But more than that, Caleb had saved the man's life once, and he felt a personal responsibility for his safety. He immediately mobilized every resource he could. The police were called, but Caleb trusted no one but a small group of officers he knew were clean. He decided to investigate on his own, with Thor by his side. Thor was crucial. The dog sniffed around Owen's mansion and picked up a trail. Caleb followed him, and the trail led them back to the abandoned tracks of the old railway. It seemed everything always came back to that damned place where it had all begun. When they arrived, they found Owen in one of the underground tunnels they had previously discovered. The businessman was tied up again, but this time he was conscious, and his eyes showed absolute panic. Next to him was a figure Caleb did not expect to see. It was Rafael Mendoza, the corrupt judge's son. A young, elegant man with a cruel smile on his face, and he wasn't alone. There were other armed men around, clearly waiting for Caleb. "Sergeant Miles, how punctual. I knew you'd come. You just can't help being the hero, can you?" Caleb kept his hand on his gun, assessing the situation. He had Thor by his side, but he was clearly outnumbered. "Let Owen go, Raphael. This can still end without anyone getting hurt." Raphael laughed loudly. "End? This is just beginning, Sergeant. You don't understand the magnitude of what you're up against. It's not just a few corrupt executives or dirty cops. It's an entire system. A system that has been working perfectly for decades, moving billions, influencing policy, controlling narratives. And you, a simple sergeant with a dog, think you can bring it all down. I'm not alone. There are federal prosecutors, journalists, honest people working on this case. You've already lost, Raphael. The operation is going to happen, and all of you are going down." Raphael took a step forward, his smile vanishing. "That's where you're wrong, Sergeant. The operation isn't going to happen, because my father, the illustrious Judge Augustus Mendoza, will ensure that all the warrants are nullified on procedural grounds. He'll ensure the evidence is deemed inadmissible. He'll ensure that every legal step you've taken is undone. And when the dust settles, you and your little prosecutor friends will look incompetent while we continue to operate freely." Caleb felt rage boil inside him. "So that's how it works? You use the judicial system to protect yourselves? You even corrupt the judges?" Raphael shrugged. "The system has always been like this, Sergeant. We just accept reality and use it to our advantage. But you, stubborn as you are, insist on tilting at windmills. And that needs to end today." Raphael gave a signal, and the armed men advanced. But before they could get close, Thor attacked. The dog launched himself at the nearest man, knocking him down and sending his weapon flying. Caleb used the distraction to draw his own weapon and fire into the air, causing everyone to momentarily retreat. In the ensuing chaos, Caleb ran to Owen and cut his ropes. "Run! Get out of here!" Owen, though weak and frightened, obeyed, running towards the tunnel exit. Caleb and Thor covered his escape, exchanging fire with Raphael's men. It was a desperate situation, but Caleb had no choice. He had to protect Owen, whatever the cost. Thor continued his fierce fight, keeping the attackers at bay. Caleb fired with precision, aiming only to intimidate, not to injure. He knew that if anyone was seriously hurt, the legal situation would become even more complicated. Finally, they heard sirens in the distance. Backup was arriving. Raphael realized the situation was lost and shouted to his men, "Fall back! Let's go!" They disappeared into the depths of the tunnel, clearly knowing escape routes that Caleb was unaware of. When the police finally arrived, they found only Caleb, Thor, and Owen, all safe and sound. But the victory was only momentary. In the following hours, Caleb received the devastating news. Judge Augustus Mendoza had indeed nullified a large portion of the search and seizure warrants, citing procedural irregularities. The operation that was supposed to happen in 3 days was compromised. Half of the targets could no longer be legally investigated, and the evidence collected so far was at risk of being declared inadmissible. The federal prosecutors were furious but powerless. The judicial system, which should have been the last line of defense for justice, was being used against them. Mark published an article denouncing Judge Mendoza's corruption, but without concrete evidence that could be used in court. It was just a journalist's word against the reputation of a respected magistrate. Caleb felt despair for the first time. They had fought so hard, risked so much, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. He met with Helen that night, and for the first time since it all began, he cried. He cried out of frustration, anger, and helplessness. Helen held him tight, letting him vent. When he finally calmed down, she looked him in the eyes and said firmly, "We're not giving up, Caleb. Not now. There are other ways to fight. If the judicial system is corrupt, we'll expose it publicly. We'll go to the media, to social media. We'll make so much noise they won't be able to hide anything anymore." Caleb nodded, his determination renewed. Helen was right. The fight wasn't over. It had just moved to a different battleground. In the following days, Mark intensified his investigative reports. He published detailed articles on every name involved in the conspiracy, on the financial transfers, on the underground tunnels, on everything. Other media outlets began to pick up the case, creating national repercussions. Public pressure grew exponentially. Protests began to take place in the streets of Pittsburgh and other cities, outraged people demanding justice, demanding that the corrupt be punished, demanding transparency. Society was waking up and the powerful began to feel fear. That's when something unexpected happened. One of the executives from Owens Company, a woman named Danielle Roche, secretly approached Caleb. She regretted her participation in the criminal operation and wanted to make a deal. She offered to testify against everyone involved, including Rafael Mendoza and even Judge Augustus Mendoza, revealing details of conversations and meetings that unequivocally proved the magistrate's corruption. With Danielle's testimony, the federal prosecutors were able to bypass the annulments made by the corrupt judge. New warrants were issued by other judges, this time in higher courts beyond Mendoza's reach. The operation was rescheduled, now with even more force and scope. And finally, the day came. In the early hours of a Thursday morning, hundreds of federal agents and prosecutors simultaneously executed warrants at dozens of locations across the United States. Companies were raided, executives were arrested in their luxury homes, politicians were led out of their offices in handcuffs, bank accounts were frozen. It was a spectacle of justice on a massive scale. Rafael Mendoza was arrested trying to flee the country in a private jet. Judge Augustus Mendoza was removed from the bench and arrested in his own home, the irony not lost on anyone. Frederick Larson, the director who coordinated the operation within Owens Company, was captured in a hideout in rural Pennsylvania. The media covered it all live. The nation watched, enthralled, as the largest corporate and judicial corruption network in the country was finally dismantled. And at the center of it all, recognized as the hero who had initiated the entire investigation, was Sergeant Caleb Miles and his faithful companion Thor. But for Caleb there was no sense of victory, only relief. Relief that they could finally breathe, that the threats would cease, that the people he loved would be safe. That night he met Helen at her house. She ran into his arms as soon as he arrived, and they stayed like that for long minutes, just holding each other, feeling the weight of everything they had been through together. When they finally separated, Helen looked into his eyes and asked softly, "And now, Caleb, what do we do now?" Caleb smiled for the first time in weeks. "Now, Helen, we start over, for real this time." And they kissed, a kiss full of promise, of hope, of a future that finally seemed possible. Thor, lying at their feet, sighed contentedly, as if he too felt that the storm had finally passed. But not everything was resolved. There was still a final chapter to be written, an outcome that no one could have foreseen. 3 months had passed since the operation that shook the nation. The newspaper headlines still brought new developments almost daily. Politicians resigned, businessmen made plea deals, magistrates were removed from their posts. The system that had seemed invincible had crumbled like a house of cards, all because of the persistence of a sergeant and the loyalty of his dog. Caleb had become a public figure almost against his will. Invitations for interviews arrived every day, offers for books, documentaries, even proposals for him to run for political office. But he politely refused them all. He didn't want fame, he didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted to go back to his simple life, do his job, and be with the people he loved. And among those people, Helen now occupied a central place again. The months following the operation were a time of rebuilding for both of them, rebuilding trust, love, a relationship that had been destroyed years ago by betrayal and pride. But this time it was different, more mature, more conscious, more true. They moved in together into a small house on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, a quiet place with a large yard where Thor could run freely. Helen reduced her workload, turning down cases that would keep her away from home for too long. Caleb returned to his routine patrols, but with a well-deserved promotion. He was now a lieutenant, with a team under his command, focused on fighting corruption within the police force itself. One Saturday morning, Caleb woke to the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. He found Helen preparing breakfast, humming softly, and felt his heart warm. Thor was at her feet, patiently waiting for any scrap of food that might fall. "Good morning, love." Helen turned and smiled, that smile that still took Caleb's breath away. "Good morning, sleep well?" "Better than I have in years. I think I can finally sleep without nightmares about tunnels and conspiracies." Helen laughed and poured the coffee. "Me too. It seems we can finally have a normal life, or something close to it." As they had breakfast together, Caleb's phone rang. It was Owen Brandon. The businessman had become a close friend in recent months, eternally grateful to the man who had saved his life twice and helped expose the rot within his own company. "Caleb, good morning. Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Owen. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'd like to invite you and Helen to dinner tonight at my house. I have something important to discuss." Caleb looked at Helen, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course, Owen, we'll be there." When they arrived at Owen's mansion that night, they were warmly welcomed. The house was different, lighter, without the armed guards who used to patrol the perimeter. Owen seemed like a different person too, more relaxed, smiling, finally free from the weight he had carried for so long. "Caleb, Helen, so glad you could make it. Please make yourselves at home." During dinner, they talked about pleasantries, about the trials that were still ongoing, about the reforms Owen was implementing in his company to ensure nothing like that ever happened again. But Caleb could sense there was something more, something Owen wanted to say but was putting off. Finally, when they finished dessert, Owen cleared his throat and began. "Caleb, Helen, I called you here today because I need to formally thank you for everything you've done for me. You saved my life, saved my company, saved my reputation, and I know words will never be enough to express my gratitude." Caleb started to protest, but Owen held up a hand. "Let me finish, please. I've been thinking a lot about how I could repay you in some meaningful way, and I've come to a decision. I'm going to create a foundation in your honor, Caleb, a foundation dedicated to training police dogs and supporting honest police officers who fight against corruption. I'm going to invest millions in it, ensure it has the best resources, the best facilities, and I would like you to be the director of this foundation." Caleb was speechless. He looked at Helen, who had tears in her eyes, and then at Owen. "I don't know what to say, Owen. That's very generous, but I'm just a police officer. I don't know if I'm qualified to run something of this size." Owen smiled. "You have the only qualification that matters, integrity, and passion for what you do. The rest we can teach. Think about it, Caleb. You could make a real difference, train the next generation of honest officers, create a culture of transparency and ethics within the force. Aren't you ready for that?" Caleb felt emotion overwhelm him. He looked at Thor, who was lying peacefully at his feet, the dog who had been his companion through all the difficult times. He thought of all the other dogs like Thor, waiting for a chance to serve, to make a difference. He thought of the young, idealistic police officers who needed support and guidance so they wouldn't be corrupted by the system. "Yes, Owen, I'm ready." The handshake that sealed the deal was firm and full of meaning. Something new was born there, something that could change the future of public safety in the United States. And Caleb knew it would be the most important challenge of his life. In the following months, the foundation took shape quickly. Owen kept his promise, investing massive resources. A large plot of land was acquired on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. Modern facilities were built, canine training experts were hired from all over the world, and Caleb coordinated everything with the same dedication he had applied to the conspiracy investigation. Helen was fully supportive, often working as a pro bono legal consultant for the foundation, ensuring everything was done according to laws and regulations. The work brought them even closer, giving them a common purpose beyond their personal relationship. But there was one piece of the puzzle that still bothered Caleb. Brian Castillo, the man who had betrayed Helen, the man who had almost destroyed his life, but who had also been instrumental in exposing the conspiracy. Brian had entered the witness protection program after testifying against everyone involved, and Caleb didn't know what had become of him since. It was Helen who brought the news. One afternoon she came home visibly emotional. "Caleb, I received a letter from Brian." Caleb felt his stomach clench. "A letter? What does he want?" Helen handed him the envelope. "I didn't open it. I thought you should read it first." Caleb hesitated but finally opened the letter. The handwriting was recognizable, even after all those years. It read, "Caleb, I know I have no right to write to you, let alone ask for anything. But I need you to know that I deeply regret everything I did. Not just my involvement in the criminal conspiracy, but especially for betraying your trust and destroying your marriage with Helen. I was a lost, greedy, selfish man. But these months in isolation have made me reflect on who I became and who I want to be. I am starting my life over in another state, with a new name, a new identity. I will never bother you again. I just wanted you to know that I am eternally grateful that you saved me, even though I didn't deserve it. And I wanted to wish you both all the happiness in the world. You deserve it. Sincerely, Brian." Caleb finished reading and was silent for a long time. Helen watched him anxiously. "What are you feeling?" Caleb sighed deeply. "Honestly, relief. Relief that he finally understands the gravity of what he did and is trying to change, and relief that we won't have to deal with him ever again. We can finally close that chapter for good." Helen came closer and hugged Caleb tightly. "I love you so much. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for being the incredible man you are." Caleb returned the hug. "I love you too, Helen, and we're going to build something beautiful together, I promise." The months turned into a year. The foundation was thriving, having already trained dozens of police dogs and offered ethics and anti-corruption courses to hundreds of police officers from across the country. The response was so positive that other businessmen began to donate resources, further expanding the project's reach. Owen became a respected public figure again, but this time for the right reasons. He used his influence to promote corporate transparency, to push for reforms in technology export laws, to support social causes. The near loss of his life had completely transformed his priorities. Mark continued his investigative journalism work, now with national recognition. He won major awards for his coverage of the conspiracy and used his platform to continue exposing corruption wherever he found it. He and Caleb remained close friends, meeting regularly to exchange ideas and information. The trials of those involved in the conspiracy proceeded slowly, as is typical in the American judicial system. Roger Travers, the corrupt captain, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Rafael Mendoza received 10 years. Judge Augustus Mendoza, in an ironic twist, was tried and sentenced to 20 years, the heaviest sentence of all, reflecting the gravity of his betrayal of public trust. Frederick Larson made a plea deal and received a reduced sentence, but still spent years behind bars. One winter evening, Caleb and Helen were sitting on the porch of their house, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. Thor was sleeping peacefully at their feet, finally at peace after years of constant tension. "Helen, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, love." "Do you regret anything? Getting back together with me, getting involved in all of this?" Helen turned to look him directly in the eyes. "I regret many things in my life, Caleb. I regret betraying you, wasting years we could have spent together. But I don't regret for a second getting back with you. You are the love of my life. Always have been, always will be." Caleb smiled and took her hand. "Then I think it's time to make this official again." To Helen's surprise, Caleb knelt right there on the porch and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, it revealed a simple but beautiful ring, with a discreet diamond that sparkled under the starlight. "Helen Travers, will you marry me? Again? But this time for good?" Helen began to cry, tears streaming freely down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed under the starry sky, and Thor woke up with the movement, wagging his tail happily, as if he understood the importance of that moment. The wedding took place 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony with only close friends and family. Owen was Caleb's best man, and Mark was the officiant, giving a moving speech about love, redemption, and second chances. Thor participated as the ring-bearer, a guy. Special touch that moved everyone present. During the reception, Caleb had a moment to reflect on everything that had happened in the last year and a half. From that morning when he found Owen tied to the tracks to this moment of pure happiness, his life had completely changed. He had faced unimaginable dangers, exposed a massive conspiracy, lost and found the love of his life, and found a greater purpose through the foundation. Helen came up and hugged him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb turned and kissed her softly. "I'm thinking about how unpredictable life is. How a simple day on patrol can change everything. How Thor, with his incredible sense of smell, led us down a path I never imagined I'd walk. And do you regret any of it?" Caleb looked around, seeing the happy faces of his friends, seeing Owen laughing with other guests, seeing Thor running joyfully through the garden. "I don't regret a thing. Every hardship, every danger, every tear, it was all worth it to get here." 2 years later, Caleb and Helen's life had settled into a happy and productive routine. The foundation had expanded to other states, training hundreds of dogs and thousands of police officers. Police corruption rates in the regions where the foundation operated had dropped significantly, proving that the project really made a difference. And then came the news that would change everything again. Helen was pregnant. Caleb received the news with a mixture of absolute joy and complete terror. He was going to be a father. After everything they had been through, after all the difficulties and triumphs, now they were going to bring a new life into the world. "We're having a baby, Caleb. We're going to be a real family." Caleb hugged her, tightly, feeling tears of happiness stream down his face. "Yes, we are. And I'm going to do everything in my power to be the best father I can be." Thor, as if understanding the importance of the moment, came over and rested his head on Helen's lap, in a gesture of protection and affection that melted both their hearts. The months of pregnancy passed amid exciting preparations. They turned one of the rooms in the house into a nursery, painted in soft shades of yellow and green. Caleb read books on fatherhood with the same dedication he applied to his work, and Helen prepared with all the serenity her calm nature allowed. And finally, on a spring night, Michael Miles was born. A healthy boy with curious eyes and a strong cry that announced his arrival into the world. Caleb held his son in his arms for the first time and felt that his life was finally complete. Thor was carefully introduced to the baby, and to everyone's delight, the dog immediately became a dedicated protector of little Michael. He slept beside the crib, alerted Caleb and Helen whenever the baby needed attention, and seemed to understand the fragility of this small being who was now part of his pack. The following years were of pure happiness. Michael grew up healthy and surrounded by love. The foundation continued to thrive, changing lives and improving the public safety system in the United States. Caleb and Helen were more united than ever, their love strengthened by everything they had faced together. Owen became practically an uncle to Michael, visiting regularly and spoiling the boy with gifts and attention. The businessman had married as well, finally finding someone who loved him for who he was, not for his fortune. He was happy, fulfilled, and grateful every day for the second chance life had given him. On a sunny afternoon, 5 years after Michael's birth, Caleb was in the yard playing with his son and Thor. The boy ran joyfully, trying to catch a ball that the dog repeatedly brought back. Helen watched from the porch, smiling, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. She was pregnant again, this time with a girl they decided to name Sophia. Caleb paused for a moment and looked around. His cozy home, his son playing happily, his wife expecting another baby, his faithful companion Thor still, strong and healthy despite the years. The meaningful work he did through the foundation. It was more than he had ever dreamed of having. Helen came down from the porch and joined them in the yard. "Thinking again?" Caleb smiled. "Always. But this time, I'm thinking about how grateful I am. Grateful for that morning on the tracks, as terrifying as it was. Because it was the beginning of all this. It's what brought us back to each other. It's what gave me purpose." Helen kissed him softly. "And I'm grateful that you never gave up. On me, on the investigation, on justice. You are the most incredible man I've ever known, Caleb Miles." Michael ran to them and hugged both their legs. "Daddy, Mummy, let's all play together," Thor barked happily, agreeing with the boy's suggestion. And so, Under the warm afternoon sun, the family spent hours playing, laughing, simply enjoying the happiness they had earned with so much effort. At night, when Michael was already asleep and Thor was resting on the living room rug, Caleb and Helen sat together on the couch. She rested her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. "You know what I realized today?" Helen asked. "What?" "That the best stories aren't the ones where everything goes right from the start. They're the ones where people make mistakes, fall, get hurt, but still find the strength to get up and try again. Our story has flaws, it has scars, but it's ours and it's beautiful exactly because of that." Caleb squeezed her hand. "You're right, and I can't wait to see how the rest of our story unfolds." "Me too. But for now, I'm just happy to be here with you in this perfect moment, and it truly was perfect. Not because everything had been easy, but because every difficulty had made them stronger, every trial had brought them closer, every tear had helped them value the smiles even more. Thor sighed contentedly in his corner, and Caleb looked at the dog with infinite gratitude. This incredible animal had been his savior in so many ways, not just on the abandoned tracks of Pittsburgh, but in life as a whole. Thor had taught him about loyalty, about instinct, about trusting in things beyond reason. And for that, Caleb would be eternally grateful. Life would go on. Of course. There would be new challenges, new joys, new difficult moments. Sophia would be born in a few months, bringing new energy and love to the family. The foundation would continue to grow, touching more lives, making more of a difference. Michael would grow up, likely following in his father's footsteps and developing a love for animals and for justice. But in that moment, on that quiet night, all that mattered was the present. The love they felt for each other, the gratitude for the second chance they received, the peace of knowing they had done the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it was dangerous. Caleb looked out the window, seeing the distant tracks of the old railway that still cut through the Pittsburgh landscape, the same tracks where it all began, where he found Owen, where he discovered a conspiracy that would change the country, the same tracks that, in a strange and unexpected way, had led him back to Helen and to the happiness he thought he had lost forever. And he realized then that life is exactly like that, made of tracks that lead us to unexpected destinations, of choices we make, without knowing the consequences, of encounters that change everything. The important thing is to have the courage to move forward, even when the path is uncertain, even when there are dangers lurking. Because in the end, if we have the right people by our side, if we keep our values intact, if we fight for what is right, fate will always find a way to reward us. And Caleb Miles, the sergeant who became a lieutenant, who became the director of a foundation, who became a husband again and a father for the first time, knew this better than anyone. His journey on the tracks of destiny had led him exactly where he needed to be, and for that he was a truly happy man,